Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Accuracy in America, brought to you by Accuracy in Academia. I'm your host, Don Irvine, joined by my co-host, Brian McNichol.
Good morning, everyone. I see you have your Brigham Young shirt on there. Show your little logo. Yeah, there you go. I saw their basketball team play the other night. They were good. They beat somebody good too.
Well, they're expected to be good because of that, because of Debansta, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. He's a
but
player too.
yeah. So
He's
I mean,
very
if they don't perform well, and they've got this guy because he's probably one and done. This is a hope for them that they can make a good run this year. But
yeah.
I don't look. Sports teams I've been somewhat anywhere rooting for associated with, it's pretty rare that they get to the end. We've had the Caps, we've had the Nationals in the last few years, but I don't see that happening anytime soon on the horizon again. And how long has it been since the Bullets Wizards won a title?
The Wizards won it. The Bullets won it
Yep,
in '78 and
yep,
lost in the finals in '79. And they have not been close since.
yeah, yeah. They're they're just they're just a terrible team. I don't know if they'll ever dig out of this thing and just
I don't know. I tell you what, I've been watching them. They play hard. These guys are trying to turn it around, and it's not easy with all they've been through, but they do play really hard. So
actually, I thought they've played better at the start of this season than they have in a while.
yeah,
So I mean, they still have a long way to go, but they kind of surprised me a little bit that it hasn't been a complete wipeout for them so far. But
right.
you
And
know,
1-6 is 1-6.
yeah,
So
1-6, 1-6. Once they get into double digits, they'll have a little more hope, right?
there you go.
So anyway, that's good. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just 1-6. Yeah, it is what it is with the Wizards.
Yep.
Um, weather check, not bad. Like we had last.
Yeah, beautiful fall
We're,
day.
we're, we're right into fall. I think I'm debating whether or not after the show I'm going to go out and spend 40 minutes blowing my leaves around. And
I was thinking about like going out to lunch or something. I don't really need to go out to lunch, but just to kind of go out and be in it. It's supposed to be up near 70 today, so
yeah,
you
see,
know.
that's part of the thing is that I'm like, if I'm going to do any leaf blowing, I'd rather do it when it's kind of still nice, sunny, and halfway, warm, rather than trying to do it when it's really cold.
Yeah, and
So,
then, like Monday, I believe we could see some snowflakes.
oh, well, yeah, and we've had some nights where there's been, at least here, I don't know where you are, but we've had kind of like a light frost on the windshield of the cars and stuff like that, early morning. So I know that we're creeping towards that phase where it's just going to get a lot colder.
That's
Um,
right.
but we haven't turned the heater on in our house yet. We've just been, I don't know what point my wife will probably say, she's got to do it, but I tend to kind of run warm now, with all my medications and everything like that. So it's like I don't, sleeping too much under the covers or bundling up too much, not a comfortable situation for me very much. So I was like, actually, I feel like I'm in a weird situation where, I can walk around the house with short sleeves or whatever, and I'm still okay. Even though it's down to about 60 in the house and getting a little chilly or a little below that. So,
Yeah, Lori doesn't care if we ever turn the heat on. It doesn't get too cold for her. So you know,
all right. So I said I told you we're having a short list today. We'll see how long this takes us to go through things. We had, well, I'm going to say before we start, I have to do the National Day. So we're at National Donut Day, but apparently I think we had a National Donut Day in June. So we're double dipping on the donuts here. Um,
they're
I
they're
mean,
big and fat. They get 2 days.
yeah.
They make
So
us big and fat anyway.
yeah, no, I mean, I guess the biggest chain of donuts, is Dunkin' Donuts, but like everything else in this world, like the Big Mac and stuff like that, they they charge a lot more for a tinier donut. It's just you kind of like I might $2 for a donut that is really a fraction of the size it used to be, and I I have a hard time. I have a hard time buying that stuff. I have a hard time buying, Munchkins. I used to love those, but I thought that you were relatively cheap, and they're not so cheap. If I'm really dying for that, I go to Walmart and buy their donut holes because it's just a better deal. It's just crazy.
Like we do these donut breakfasts at church, and we get we used to get Dunkin' for it, but now we get them from like Giant. And they're good and they're big. They're not small. They're big
Right.
old
Yeah.
donuts. They're not really trying to make their
Right.
profit on
Yeah.
donuts.
No, I mean the grocery store donuts was be the ones that are kind of famous around the area are from Shoppers Food Warehouse,
Yeah,
which have been, they're the new owners have been cutting back and closing up stores, so there are not a
yeah.
whole lot of them up, but they had what's called the Colossal Donut, and that was probably the best and biggest bargain you could get in donuts if you really like
Yeah,
donuts.
but yeah,
But
Shopper Food they're the king of this, but they're kind
yeah,
of like you say, they're sort of out of the business.
right. So we may have an R.I.P. for Colossal Donuts here at some point. All right. Well, so Tuesday was election night in parts of the country. We have talked about it a little bit leading up to this stage. We'll start with New York City. Zohar Mamdani, handily beat in Andrew Cuomo. Not surprisingly. I mean, this is not a big surprise. Um, I was surprised a little bit about the turnout. Apparently it was the largest turnout in over half a century.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
he really got. I mean, Mandami had over 1 million votes. Yeah, and he won by what 150,000 votes or something like that. Beat
yeah,
Cuomo. And you can take Cuomo's votes and Sliwa's votes, and he still wouldn't have beaten Mandami,
right.
right? He would have been closer, but he still wouldn't have had it. So Mandami is up there. But I saw a thing from Steve Kornacki, who is no longer with MSNBC because that whole MSNBC thing, as they've been preparing for their split, some people have now been exclusively, gone to NBC, like Kornacki, and MSNBC has been trying to. They have to replace a lot of people that kind of ran dual roles, but now are basically only under contract to NBC. And he was pointing out that the age disparity was quite stunning. I mean, Mandami, 45 or under, that was his bread and butter. 45 or older, that's Cuomo, and so that you can kind of look at that and say, the older 45 is not really that old, but somehow, somewhere, for some reason, that was the split of just kind of the younger people went from Mandami, the older, middle-aged, older people went for Cuomo. Trump endorsed him kind of on the last minute thing, which was just kind of really totally useless. I don't really see any point in doing
Right.
that at that point.
Trump more commented on the race than he did
Yeah,
endorse.
and then Elon jumped in there too, and he was like, "Look, you're not going to affect this race at this point." I mean,
Right.
I think,
And I don't think they tried to. I think Trump is sort of like, if you want to know my take is, I'd probably just vote for Cuomo, even though, he has a lot of flaws, just to not have a communist mayor of New York. So,
right, yeah. So New York City now has this socialist, communist, whatever you want to call him. Is he the face of the Democratic Party now going forward? This young guy. I mean, some say yes, some say no. I mean, AOC is happily prancing around and thinking that maybe this gives these socialist progressives whatever some new life after the squad has been kind of stumbling a bit over the last few years. But is this
okay,
really?
so can he be a squad auxiliary guy? I'm not sure about that. Right? I mean, the thinking is what you were saying is that now that group of people has marched forward and captured this mayoralty in New York. Well, I'm not sure. I mean, he probably was happy to have that appearance before the election, right? Please vote for me. If you love AOC, you should love me, and all this stuff. But like he's for throwing gay people off the building. That's not a leftist thing, right? But I mean, he's a Muslim. He's a strong adherent Muslim. He believes in not just the negatives but the positives, and in Islam, they call the negatives is don't drink alcohol, don't eat, don't do caffeine, right? So it's the don'ts, but he's for the do's as well, kill the Jews, kill the kafir, anybody who's not, kill all the non-believers, and gays are killed instantly and all this kind of stuff. So it's they're sort of going through what we're going through. Is like they got some people in this movement that they say some things that the movement's going to have to deal with. They're going to have to kick them out, keep them in, whatever. So it'll be interesting to see, like, when he starts actually doing stuff. I mean, I don't think he's going to throw gays off the building in New York anywhere, but they may suddenly find that, like, the coalition, that he sees is not the coalition that they see. So, because there's, he's doctrinaire, and a lot of what he wants is pretty stridently not what you think of as an American leftist.
Yeah. So, part of this is just that I think, he won a lot of these people over because, the mood in a lot, parts of the country, particularly, these liberal states, is just that, prices are too high, unemployment is, growing. We don't, there's, job movement is much harder than it used to be. New York's an expensive city. I mean, there's just, you can't get around that. New York, LA, Chicago, there are expensive cities in America. They have been like that for a long time. And, Mondami has all these, he threw out all these ideas about how he was going to try to make it more affordable. Well, you can't go, you can't wave a magic wand and say, voila.
Right. That's right. So a lot of what he's proposing has the potential to make things much worse, right? Like rent control, who he wants. Well, we want to build a lot of housing and we want to have rent control. Well, why would anybody build housing if there's going to be rent control, right? And he wants to start grocery stores. Like where that's been tried, it hasn't worked. And, it's still unclear to me why they need that, right? The 8 million people or whatever seem to be eating now. I understand there's food islands and, you don't really have a lot of like Safeways and Giants and whatnot in New York City, right? A lot of it comes from bodegas, but, you do, I mean, they're pretty good at fresh fruit, fresh vegetables and stuff like that. So, it'll be interesting to see, like, does he really get that off the ground? And, how much money goes into it and what level of success it has.
Yeah, look, bodegas are mostly run by immigrants, right? Whether they can be Latin, they can be Latin American kind of Latin, immigrants. They'll be Asians. There's
Arabs.
Indians, all kinds of people,
meat, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a whole range of people that run these bodegas, and so that's a big part of the New York economy. And you're trying to come in there and you're saying, like, you want to establish like these government-run grocery stores. Well, you're now taking aim also at the bodega economy too, in terms of what they provide. Those bodegas, I mean, they're not big, but they provide the basics that people need, at reasonable prices. Considering New York is New York, and you don't have. I mean, where is he planning to build? A grocery store. A grocery store is just like you said. You're talking about the Safeways, the Krogers.
Here's the question. Here's the deal. Why aren't there a bunch of Safeways and Krogers in New York? Right? Because that's a big lot, right? Those stores are big. They need a lot of parking. If you're going to have a store that big, so there's just not a lot of lots that big in New York, right? Simply none exists. So what are you going to do? You're going to kick people out of stuff. You're going to eminent domain people to build a government grocery store. So, but I mean, he's going to get to try. I guess he will try, and I don't know if they'll get that off the ground, but if they do, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it will be. I mean, I think Mondami's going to be like a lot of other politicians, who have. There's been a lot of promises that he's made, all these ideas that attract a lot of people to his cause. But implementing these things is going to be a different ball game altogether. I mean, there's going to be regulatory hurdles. There's going to just be so much government in there in the way, and just the reality of things. You cannot get this done easily. And the other side, besides what you mentioned on the grocery store, I mean, besides the fact that they need a large footprint, uh, the question there will be is just that, you know, bodegas get a certain degree of crime. I mean, that's just because there are criminal elements in New York, and bodegas are kind of easy picking and for arrests and stuff like that. So you can have that, but look at Washington D.C. Washington D.C. has a similar problem in the sense that it's hard for the giants and the Safeways to actually establish a store. It's not because of the size. They found there are plenty of shopping centers that they have gone into, areas that they have actually tried to go into areas where they're, what they're called the food deserts, right, or whatever, and provide their services. But most of them don't last that long because the people in that area steal them blind. There's too much crime, too much theft, and everything like this, and they're not public charities, in that sense. So
you remember the Walmarts in DC?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I mean, they tried. You can't blame them. They put those things right in the middle of the food deserts, and the neighbors harassed them, didn't want it to come in. They harassed them once it opened. They made it clear they weren't welcome. It's like, okay, this is what you said you wanted, but okay. And they moved on.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, you're never. I mean, DC, you're never going to see a warehouse club like a Sam's or Costco. I mean, they're large and they need even larger footprints in a sense than a Giant or a Safeway. But it's hard for them. They'll be on the outskirts, where they've got more control. But DC can they can be very inhospitable, and yet this is part of the problem with a lot of these blue cities is that they point the finger at these companies and say, oh, these big corporations refuse to come here, they're redlining us or whatever, they won't come to our area because they consider us to be too poverty stricken or whatever, and they can't make any money there or whatever. But they are businesses. And a lot of these guys they're willing to probably break even, as a public good. They can take a store and put it somewhere, and if it's at least a break even, maybe a slight loss, type of a thing like that, they might be able to live with it and then try to make their money back on others. And I think we've said this before on the show, grocery store businesses are very thin margin businesses. So they you steal from them, you do things, and it's very easy to push them from the black to the red, and you can push them deep into the red very quickly to the point where they say it's unsustainable. We can sustain this level, but we can't sustain this level, going
Right.
down. So, the population of, of the District of Columbia and other cities where they've tried to do this, they have sown the seeds of their own destruction in that sense for grocery stores. You can complain all you want about food deserts. But if you've had companies like that come in and try that, and try to open up, and then they only last 2 or 3 years or whatever it is, it's not the store, it's not the corporation, it's the population that they serve that didn't come and support them. Instead, that they just tried to basically run them out of business because they would just walk out. Because I mean, we're in an era now where you can read stories about there's basically kind of a no confrontation policy, right? If you walk out of a store with stuff, in a lot of cases, you won't get prosecuted. Nobody's going to stop you, even if the security is right there in front of you. They're not going to do that. They don't want to confront you. They're afraid about what one, the danger to the security, and anybody else, but just also public image, because in this day, you can turn that into something very negative on social media, even though you were in the right.
I'll never forget my brother, and this is probably 20 years ago. He worked at a Safeway in McLean, one of the guys that worked there was a guy who had been a cop in the Philippines, retired, moved to the United States. So he just had this little job in a grocery store. And so one day, some guy goes running out of the store with stuff, and then they have that policy, right? Let them go. We just see who they are, try to stop it the next time. That guy comes in, we're going to be looking at him, right? Just try to stop him. But this guy, he's a cop. No one told him this. He went and ran out, tackled the guy, got him arrested. They're like, oh, wait a minute. But I mean, they talked to him. I mean, they didn't put him in trouble for it, but they talked to him. And they're like, well, we don't really want to do that. So, it can be done. And that's part of the deal is like, if you allow it, it'll happen.
Right.
If you don't enforce it. And the other thing is, I don't know if you saw any of Trump's interview on 60 Minutes, most of which was pretty funny. But she asked him, Nora O'Donnell did it for CBS. She asked Trump, she said that, a lot of people are saying that Zoran is the left version of you, And Trump said, well, I'm better looking. So, and he couldn't get her to agree with that, but he's a little older, but there's, so let's explore that though, because people are talking about that, and he is a populist of the left. So what is electable in the country now, right? Can you win? I'm talking about hot elections that are actually gathering worldwide attention and people are watching, like the mayor election, right? Can you win that with a traditional button-down conservative candidate? Can you imagine? I mean, who if we're going to get out of the MAGA mold, who would Republicans run for president? We're going to get out of the anti-MAGA mold, who would Democrats run? If you wanted to go back to George Bush, Al Gore type politicians, who are those people now? And do any of them have any following? Could you imagine like Mike Pence trying to run for president, right? He would get nowhere. So, it's kind of, comparing those two is, there's problems with it, but it's kind of like, big, bold people with big, bold plans is what America's looking for. And, they're tired of, we're trying to solve that problem, but we really can't, manage to get on top of it. They're like, get on top of it. We're tired of hearing about it. We're tired of dealing with it. Get on top of it. So, I think that, it's interesting to watch because you're going to see things possible in politics that haven't been possible maybe ever before in the United States, and maybe not for a long time, because there's the current is dissatisfaction with the status quo and dissatisfaction with how we've been led and governed and so forth for 50, 60, 80 years, right? And it's like a lot of frustrations are coming to a head. People are tired of the debt. They're tired of ever increasing taxes. They're tired of regulations that don't make sense. They're tired of health insurance being a daily, monthly crisis, right? So, it's like someone who stands up and says, I have a bold plan to address that. Here's my plan. It does not matter if the plan is cockamamie and has no shot of working, right? Don't put it down to people will obviously see that this is a stupid plan because they won't. They need to hear something that they keep asking Trump for a plan. I mean, for healthcare. And I'm like, we don't need a healthcare plan. We need you go buy health insurance for your family and I go buy health insurance for mine, right? The plans have been the problem.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely been proven. I mean, all this argument about it for sure. So yeah, so that's the thing. And that is actually, that's Mandami, big, bold plans and ideas that attracted a lot of people, and to get a turnout like that they haven't seen in over 50 years, says something about big, bold plans. They don't have to be something that's even realistic. They can be, like you say, they can be cockamamie. And people are dissatisfied and they want something, and they see in Mandami a guy who's got some ideas, some ideas. Now, 4 years from now, it may be vastly different because it's going to be a tough slog for him. But maybe he gets one or two things done, and then he wins re-election. I mean, Republicans in New York City, to win that mayoral race, that's always going to be a hard, tough road. But they don't necessarily need to go to the Mondami extreme.
Well, I mean, it's always going to be somebody on the pretty far left of the party. He's not that far out of. What's the difference between him and de Blasio? Not really a whole lot.
Right. There wasn't a lot of difference between those two at all. All right. So we'll move down a little bit and we'll move into New Jersey. So there was a big race there. The polls had shown that Chuck Ciattarelli was pretty close with Jackie Sherrill. The end result was not even close. Nowhere. He got beat, and he got beat bad. So
Mikey Sherrill.
Mikey Sherrill. Yep.
Jackie was a football coach.
Yeah. Did I say Jackie?
Yeah.
No, man, whatever.
He was good. He was a good coach.
Okay. See, I still have a little sports on the brain in there. Yeah.
It's funny because like Jackie is kind of a girl's name, right?
Yeah.
Who a guy has, and Mikey is kind of a boy's name that a girl has. So.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Mikey Sherrill. And so, yeah, she survived. I don't even know if it was that big a scandal on the whole Naval Academy thing. It didn't seem to really resonate very well.
Right.
Ciattarelli, this was his third time, trying to win this race. Now the Democrats. Now look, their voters in New Jersey are going to get what they voted for. They've been taxed to death. They've lived under Democratic governorship. They've had that for the last 8 years, and they're going to get at least another 4 years. Plus, it looks like the state legislature, which some had thought that the Republicans might gain some seats, the Republicans are going to lose more seats to the point that they may actually Democrats may get a supermajority. And so, this will be anything goes for the Democrats at that point in terms of what they want to do, if that is actually the final vote count. So Sherrill, I mean, the Democrats, they looks like they're going to have almost carte blanche to do whatever they want. And I don't want to hear from New Jersey voters, that this was, we made a mistake. And it's like, it's pretty clear exactly what you were going to get, from the Democrats, going forward. Ciattarelli talked a lot about cutting taxes and trying to make things right. I don't see that happening under the Sherrill administration.
Well, she's kind of the anti-Mondami. She has no plans, right? She's just going to, I'm not Trump and I'm a Democrat. And, we'll do Democrat things, and y'all get that. Y'all know what that means, right? So, I mean, so you're basically, it's going to be, you have a big majority, but you don't know how much to get done because, you're kind of leaderless and adrift. You won't get a strong signal from the top about where it needs to go. And what they want to do is most of it's not productive anyway. So, that's a state where, I mean, does it really matter? Can she really change a whole lot about New Jersey in 4 years? I don't think so.
Yeah. So, with this race and with the Virginia race that we're going to discuss here soon, the media has made all of these races, I guess even your race, this is a huge night for the Democrats. This is like their Democratic Party is reviving. They found a path in 2026.
Trump has been totally rejected.
It's like, please explain. I mean, Mondami had his socialist ideas and his big ideas. It really wasn't about being anti-Trump, really. I mean, he threw Trump in there after Trump endorsed Cuomo, but Trump was not a factor in New York. New Jersey, Sherrill, she's kind of like, Ciattarelli's all in with Trump. He's got the endorsement and all of this stuff. And Trump's not super popular, in these areas, so you can do that. And she did claw back some of the Black and Latino vote that Trump had gained, in his election. So some of that swing there, but it's still like it's like I'm not Trump, or I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to govern like Trump or not be like Trump. This is not because I've got big bold plans and I'm going to solve the woes. The economy, depending upon what part of the country you're in, is either doing pretty well or it's kind of just, it's kind of stumbling along, and some places are doing worse than others. And, inflation is just kind of, hitting, kind of stuck at a level there that people are now trying to get used to. I mean, 3% inflation isn't killer inflation. It's just higher than we were used to, years ago, and we still have, we're still trying to figure out how we can get back to that point. But I don't
Besant says 2.7, by the way.
Hmm?
Besant, he says it's 2.7, not 3.
Yeah, I mean, look, and we don't have, with the government, we don't have any real data,
It's not,
right?
it's shut down, so you don't know for
You
certain.
don't really,
That's what he's saying. I'm just
yeah,
saying.
we don't know. We don't really know what's going on there. But and there's been for years, decades, a lot of, fussing about the way the inflation figures are put together to begin with. But look, I don't know if there is a perfect way of doing it, either. There has to be some kind of standard, and this is the standard, we know they agreed on.
Like that, one of the big measures they pulled out food and gas. Why are you telling me what the inflation rate is excluding food and gas? I don't care. I mean, most months all I buy is food and gas. I might have one little purchase of some other durable good, but clothes or something for the house or whatever. But most of the time, all I buy is food and gas. So
right. I mean, I think there's a point there. I mean, that food and gas / energy, those are big expenses for people. I
yeah,
mean, I get, you can factor in, like housing costs. What about
right.
rent or mortgages or whatever? Because that is usually the biggest expense of anybody. I mean, there's certain breakdowns of, like, what does it cost for you to lease a car or to make your down payment or your monthly car payment or something like that. Because we've gone from an era of where there used to be 36-month car deals, right? You would buy your car and pay it off in 3 years to 4 years, to now where the deals are now 7 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Because I mean, car prices. I mean,
Cars
you go to a dealer. What it's going to be, what, 50 grand?
Yeah.
Unbelievable to buy a car. So and used cars are slightly cheaper, but there's not the gap that there used to be, not either. So matter of fact, the Wall Street Journal did an article where just past week where they said the repo men, they're busier than ever. They're just they're so busy, repossessing cars and stuff like that, and which means that the auction houses are just doing, booming business and all of that. It's not. Yeah, I don't know. And people might think repo, there's some romantic, cool thing about it, but it's a tough business.
My uncle was a repo guy. My cousin used to go pick up cars for him. He had a wrecker, drove all over the place. And he got shot at a bunch of
Right,
times.
exactly.
Ain't nothing glamorous about that job.
You got to watch out for that. They actually highlighted one guy who had he spotted a car, in a driveway, but the problem was that the car was boxed in by other cars, and he tried as he might, he calculated and tried to figure out whether or not he could try to somehow go around the car and somehow excise it, but it wasn't, and it was nighttime, because they say nighttime is always the best time to go grab the car.
Yeah.
And all that, but
not all states let you steal them, but like Louisiana lets you steal them. Stealing them, but go remove them without getting the person's permission.
Right. And I mean, and there's a whole lot of things going on. I mean, people, you signed a contract to say you're going to pay X amount of dollars per month for X amount of years, and if you don't make the payments, the car company has a right to reclaim the car. And
That's right.
It's not that they claim the car 1 month in. It usually is many months in, I believe, before they even get to that point.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, who does kind of have the advantage now is people buying like cars for their kids, right? There's a lot of good $5,000 cars out there because they're, cars last longer now. I mean, the average car on the highway now is almost 15 years old. Like, cars have never lasted longer. They've never been better built and so forth. So yeah, it costs a lot to get a new one, but you don't have to get a new one, and you can drive quite old cars for a long time.
Well, you've had cars you've driven for a long time
Yeah, I got
yourself.
a 2005 now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the cars in our driveway are 2015 and 2017. We don't drive them a ton, but when I was growing up, I mean, you get to 10 years on a car, you probably were forced to replace it because the
That's
car was
right.
breaking
It got to
down
the point it was too expensive to
to repair
maintain.
it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So, nowadays it's just like, yeah, cars are better made overall. They will, if you give them basic maintenance of making sure you got the right tires on there, do the oil changes and whatever, unless you have an EV, which doesn't need a lot of that stuff, you're going to make them last,
Yeah.
and so that has another effect on all of these things that go on. Um, so now going down to your backyard with Abigail Spanberger winning. She won by a larger margin than virtually every poll that I saw had it going there, which underscored to me just how poor a candidate Winsome Sears was. I mean, I was not impressed with her overall. I mean, what did she do as lieutenant governor? Not that a lot of lieutenant governors in any state really do much of
Not a lot to
anything.
do. That's
Yeah, they don't get a
clearly.
lot of duties, and so it's
And she was. I
it's
mean, they're both like neither one of these people are what you would call a smooth politician, right?
right.
They're both kind of halting and awkward and goofy, But like, she was worse. She was worse than Spanberger. Spanberger managed to just, and I thought at the time, they had the debate, and Sears asked her about the guy saying, he wanted to kill the Republicans and whatnot, and she just stood there and didn't say anything, and people were like, "Oh, that's a terrible mistake," and it's like, no, she didn't say anything. She's not held responsible. 2 weeks from now, when nobody remembers this debate, it's like there will be no record of Spanberger criticizing this guy, right? And so there wasn't, and he won. He ended up winning. I think Rich Barris said, one of the pollsters said that there was up to 10% shy voter on him, where people wouldn't say who they were going to pick, but picked Reed, right? Because picked Jones because he was, they didn't want to say, yeah, I support this guy who said these horrible things. So, he won. Spanberger won. The lieutenant governor, who was the Republican candidate, was a radio host, was known in the Richmond area and Southside Virginia and so forth, but not so much up here. Republicans chose for some reason to do nothing to help him, even though he was pretty MAGA and so forth. It might have, his race was close and he might have had a chance to win. They thought Miaris was a sure deal, and he didn't win. He didn't. It wasn't even that. It was like 3 points. It wasn't even that close. You're right that she didn't have any money. She rejected the embrace, right? She thought that I'm going to ride Youngkin's coattails. A lot more people in Virginia know who Trump is than know who Youngkin is, right? Even though he's the governor of the state, like Virginia is a state, you can only serve one term. It's biennial budgets. So you really get to, your print is one budget in the middle of your term. Now you do the planning for the budget as you're leaving. So there'll be some in print from Youngkin in the next year or two, right? As we go through that budget plan. But you really, it's not as governorships go, it's not a powerful job. It's pretty limited. So, he didn't do much. He was supposed to be the one to help her since she didn't want to turn to Trump. And of all those candidates, Trump endorsed like 60 candidates the day before the race, and she was not one of them, right? Because she didn't reach out. Now, the other thing that happened in Virginia that will take longer to address, but it's under the same rubric, is it was a wipeout in the House delegates. All 100 seats were up. And like people like Delegate Obenshain from down and around Harrisonburg, his family's been in the Virginia General Assembly since like the 1820s, got hammered, got beat badly, right? So, and that's a pretty Republican area for there's a college there, James Madison, but for the most part, that's a pretty Republican area. And, the people like that got ran off the road. Anybody who was anywhere close to a balanced district lost. So it was a pretty bad day for Republicans in Virginia. They really got wiped out at the House of Delegates level.
Right. Yeah. And, and when it comes to, as you say, Virginia governor, I mean, now, for me, I mean, I think, like a guy like Glenn Youngkin, I mean, he can do the things that, Tim Kaine, Chuck Robb, Mark Warner, that he can catapult himself into a potential Senate run or higher. I think he's got, he has the credibility and the chops to do so, and is attractive enough to do so. Even if Sears had won, I don't know that would have been the case with her. Spanberger winning the governorship there doesn't catapult her to the national stage as
Right.
a potential 2028 anything. She's just not good.
Right.
So, as you pointed out, so they're not minting a new star there by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
New Jersey, I think the same thing goes there too. But I don't think Mikey Sherrill is going to be any outstanding person that the Democrats are going to be looking for in 2028 as they still search for what the heck they're trying to do, going forward. So the Democrats didn't, they gained numbers wise, but they really didn't gain politically all that much. I mean,
Exactly.
I'm not losing any sleep over this. I kind of went to bed yesterday saying like, I don't think we're going to see the status quo will be the status quo. It did surprise me how badly the Republicans did in the state house. Though that was they just
Yeah.
that was a wipeout that was far beyond anything I would have ever thought that would happen for them. So that's not good there. But but I was looking at the election numbers and I thought, so Sears, if she could have polled better, if she could have polled closer to say 48% or 49% or something like that, made it a closer race. I think there would have been a higher potential than down ballot as you get to the lieutenant governor and the attorney general and some other things like that. That would have had a plus effect on there. And John Reed and Jason Miyares, I mean, they might have been able to actually win. They didn't lose by as much as she did, right? I
Right.
mean,
Right.
those
Yeah. No, there was no coattails to ride. Right. In fact, the
no,
coattails worked against you.
right,
And it's like the whole thing though. Like for months, she didn't campaign at all. Right. And I guess she was raising money, and people would say, "Oh, she's real good in a room." It's like this is not going to be held in a room. It's just it don't work that way. So
it's not these 50 people or 100 people.
that's right. And she didn't raise money, so she couldn't get on TV till the last week of the campaign. And even like late in the campaign when she was going around the state holding rallies, trying to build support, I would get these things from her, and she was like in Fort Chiswell, she's in Franklin County, she's in Dinwiddie, she's in, girlfriend. The battle is not there. Those counties are 70, 80, 90% in some cases Republican, right? It's like the battle is here. The battle is Richmond. The battle is the beach, right? And really, in her case, the beach is the flippable one. She's a Marine, right? She's pro-gun. It's a big military area and so forth. You can't be out in Southwest Virginia. Those votes you got those votes, right? You don't have to worry about that. You got to be out where the action is. And she just didn't do it. And she did not want, every crowd she was in was friendly, right? She didn't take on any hostile questions or people, that's the kind of stuff that helps candidates grow. And if you engage that, like the other people make a mistake, they get to like they were trying to hand her this, right? You had the woman in Arlington holding up the thing. She shouldn't be allowed to drink at the water fountains. You had all these, other racist attacks that her people put on there. You have a guy who wants to kill the Republicans on the ticket. And none of that, I mean, she couldn't get any bounce out of that. In fact, the more good news that came in, the worse she did. So, another thing is like, you got to look at some of the pollsters who have been real accurate in previous elections understated the damage last night. They thought it was going to be a lot closer than it was. So, we have to look at it like how did this get polled, and who needs to fix what on that score too. But it's like Virginia, our Republican Party, Virginia has been pretty much a mess. I think the day George Allen said the word macaca was pretty much the end of the RPV as we know it, right? It has really never recovered. So, I don't know what they do, but I think a whole new leadership team, message, way of going about this, if this is not a wake up call for this, I don't know what is.
Yeah. All right. So, as someone who lives in Virginia, though, I mean, do you have any prediction or idea who they should run 4 years from now?
Freitas. I think he's probably Nick Freitas. Do you know who he is?
Yeah.
He's easily the most talented Republican politician in Virginia. There's someone else out there. I don't know who they are. Who it would be.
Do you think Jason Mraz would try to make a run?
No.
Okay.
I don't know that he's a. I mean, how do you lose when your opponent wants to kill your ticket?
Yeah, it's Virginia is one of those unique states because of the one-term limitation that creates these interesting situations. Because
the other interesting situation is, Trump's fired, hundreds of thousands of federal workers. No state in the country is more dependent on federal workers than Virginia. So, we got a lot of people that Trump fired, or they're not working because of the government being closed and so forth. So they're loaded for bear too. That won't necessarily be the case in 4 years, or at the midterms or the 2028. I think the other thing is like you're going to hear a lot of stuff in the next few days about this changes everything in the midterms. Right, as far as I know, this may change in a day or so because you're starting to get these redistricting things come in. But right now, Charlie Cook Political Report. It was not a conservative thing. By the way, did you know that Charlie Kirk and Mike Johnson went to the same high school in Shreveport?
Oh.
Both Captain Shreve High School grads. Anyway, so what was my point I was making? It was great. It was a great point. He has 219 seats right now as Republican locks, definite Republican win.
Based on the current map.
Huh?
Based on the current map.
Based on the current map. So, you're going to get, 5 more from Texas, 6 more from Texas, 3 or 4 more from California now, I guess, since they passed their deal. You could get 18 or 19 if the Louisiana versus Calais goes the right way. There's no more, majority minority districts. That's not a thing anymore, which would be Republican. Almost all of those would go to Republicans. And so, the idea that like you flipped the midterms last night, simply not true.
Yeah, no, that's true. I don't think this really has an effect on that at this point in time, except for the fact that Gavin Newsom is basically going to, with Prop 50 passing, they'll be able to blunt the Texas gain more or less, but that'll be a temporary thing. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was responsible for a lot of this garbage in California to begin with, stood up to fight against it and all this. But and really, I mean, they want to get rid of another 5 seats. I mean, isn't the ratio something like 43-9 or something like that in California? You want to take
40% of the 45% of the voters are
you want to take that to 48-4 or something like that. Yeah. It's like, in what universe does this make any sense that this is somehow the way things should be? Okay. I mean, I know we've talked about elections have consequences, but this is ridiculous. I mean, when you've got, like I said, 45%, Republican registration in California, and they're going to wind up with, in essence, what is it? About 7% representation in Congress
in the name of fairness.
Out of their delegation, that makes no sense. That's why all this stuff, this idea that you've got the population of your state is 20% black, so you've got to devise something where the blacks are, but people move where they move, and they live where they live.
That's right.
Divide up the districts, try to make them contiguous and fair or whatever, and do this. But Schwarzenegger was the one who put in that independent redistricting commission, even though it was very rhino-ish anyway at best for the Republicans that were there. And then now Newsom has basically undone that for a few years. But this is setting off just fights all over the place, right? Wes Moore is going to
Right.
try to push through something in Maryland.
So that's
Virginia.
it's
Virginia
only
now.
Andy Taylor he can get, right? That's the only one left, right?
Andy Harris.
Andy Harris.
Yeah, you've got one guy. It's like
you got one guy, and so my understanding is his district is the Eastern Shore, basically,
right,
with a little bit on this side of the bridge, but mostly it's Eastern Shore. So, how do you rejigger that to where he doesn't? Because you go down to the Eastern Shore, like every road sign is Trump, right? That's a really hardcore Republican area. So how do you do that? How can you slice that pie to where you get the courts tell you that it's got to be contiguous and make sense. Remember, there was a court ruling, North Carolina had the district that, it went down I-85 and, nobody on either side of I-85 was in the district, but, I-85 itself was, so you could connect it to some area in the South or whatever. So, the court said they got to be contiguous and they got to make sense socially and whatever the language was. So how does that, how can you dip into the Eastern Shore and do that? How do you create that district? I'm just thinking, the logistical challenge of that one is interesting. And how do you do it without weakening other places to the point where you could lose one elsewhere?
Yeah, I don't know. Because, the Eastern Shore is, basically once you cross the bridge, right, the Bay Bridge, this is like, you're going to have more than one representative, or you're going to divide it up to get rid of.
Yeah,
you're going to have some crazy.
You can't say that those people's interests aren't the same, right? When you're on that bridge, that's a congressional district, right?
Yeah. So that's and for one, it's just, but that's why this whole thing to me is just such a crock. When they were doing this stuff, but the fight has begun, and maybe that's what Trump meant, by "and so it begins." It's everybody's like, "Oh, what does that mean?" That's an ominous message.
Yeah, but the other thing is so Trump's response on this is he spent most of the first year on foreign policy, right? He's a lot of investment in foreign policy. Tariff, using tariffs to extract gains and negotiating all these deals and bombing Iran and all this kind of stuff. So, now he's set up the pillars of his economic policy. But I think what you're going to see, between now and next November is domestic policy, is finishing the job on that,
Okay, let's as we get around the turn here, we still have the government shutdown. We have now set a new record on day 36. We're not, resist. It's not going to end here in the next couple of days.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah. So we're saying, both sides seem to be entrenched, though. It does seem there's some cracks in the Democrats, because I think they're feeling the pain here with all the government workers and all these things. And, and I understand, if you're government workers, one of the guys at church was telling me that just that, there's, the way our church leadership works is that people who need assistance of any kind usually go to our bishop and say, hey, and whatnot. And we're hearing more that because we have a lot of federal workers that they're now getting pinched on this. We just happen to have a guy on Sunday who's a young guy, got 3 or 4 kids, and his thing is he does research on 3D ceramic printing, but he's furloughed. He's getting by for now, but there's a limit to how, before, they just can't, it's just going to be untenable for them. And we obviously have a very big military contingent here in DC area working Pentagon and all these defense jobs and things like that, and around the country as well. We've got several bases here as well. So, something is going to give eventually. And then, the air traffic control, they said Houston had 3-hour waits in the TSA line.
Yeah, I saw that picture.
Yeah, I don't know. I wanted to dig deeper. I didn't have time. I wanted to find out what the pre-check line was like, just to see, just as a comparison. sometimes, I mean, maybe the pre-check line was an hour long. I don't know,
Yeah.
by comparison or whatever. But can you imagine these long lines and trying to catch a flight? Everything.
Yeah. I
My
don't want
wife,
anything to do with flights or airlines or airplanes of any
yeah,
kind.
my wife and I are taking we had high hopes. So we are, we're going to be out of town to go see our grandson out in Utah for his first birthday. That's not until early December. It's like, okay, so we just have under a month before we leave. It's like, I hope they figure that out. We would leave from Dulles and go to Provo, probably two airports that are probably not radically affected by this yet. It tends to be the bigger cities, but the longer this goes on, the more it affects everything,
Right.
and stuff. So yeah, they need to fix this. But Democrats, look at this. I mean, we're what is it, November 5th? That the bill that the House passed was only going to be good for what, November 21st or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's right.
So even if they get
Passes
this
today, it's 16 days. You got to live
16
on.
days, they still got to figure this out. I don't know, but they need to do something and get the government back up and running. But they need, they can't. Republicans can't cave in on the health thing, because the healthcare thing is just a monstrosity.
Well, it's more than that. I mean, there's a reason that they're entrenched, and there's a reason that this is hard to work out. And the reason is, like, what's at stake is, all the stuff that there was the big rescission package, remember, in late July, where Trump just cut out a lot of spending. And that was when he took out, NPR and PBS, among other things. He took out all the Doge money, all the money that Doge, the waste that Doge had identified as being wasteful, the USAID and so forth. He took out all that stuff. So, this is a battle to get that back. What the Republicans are saying is just lock in what we did in late July, and then we'll go negotiate whatever, right? And figure out Obamacare and whatever. And what they're saying is, we want all that stuff back. We want it all back right now. We want all the USAID, all the PBS, all that kind of stuff. The health, the Obamacare subsidies, the subsidies that went for illegal aliens, medical care, for healthcare for illegal aliens, and so forth. We want it all back, or we're not going to agree, right? So, and if they don't prevail on this, right, those things are probably gone for good, right? We'll move on. The people will buy health insurance that they can afford, or they won't, or, whatever happens. Or, Trump says he can come up with something that'll please everybody. He'll get his chance, But this is the existential battle. This is the battle they gotta fight, and it's the test of, like, do Republicans really believe in fiscal sanity? We always present ourselves as, we're for cuts, get government out of our lives, small the size of government. This is the most stark choice that they've ever faced. Are you for big government or small government? And if we can't keep our guys in line, and it's all but the morons. It's Massey in the House, Rand Paul in the Senate, right? That oppose, right? But every other Republican is on the page with this. Fetterman's on the page with this. So if we don't win it, we're back to what we were before the rescission, and probably doomed forever to be way in debt and all that kind of stuff.
Right. I mean, the thing too on the healthcare thing is that if they allow the enhanced subsidies to continue, it probably becomes a permanent thing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And you asked for temporary. We gave you temporary. Temporary's over.
Yeah.
And that's where we have to stay on this. We cannot back up.
Right. And the states over the last several years, what they've done is that they basically sloughed off people from their healthcare onto the federal, dole, in essence, and where the Fed, taxpayers are paying for this, all of us, rather than just dealing with it on a state by state basis. So, particularly the blue states, have been doing this, and so you've got to draw a line here. You've got to just do this. So, I don't feel at this point much of any, of this pain. I'm sure at some point in time there's some service I'll need that may get affected, temporarily at the very least. But you know, for Republicans, they need to hold the line, and Democrats have just got to get with the program. It's like let's pass a clean bill. Let's even if it's 15 days, let's let the government run for a little while, and then go back and then figure this out again and get something that they can do more long term. But understand that the Republicans are, they're not messing around. We've got to control our spending. It's out of control, and we can't make all this temporary stuff permanent. All right.
And nothing that happened last night changes any of that.
Right. All right. So quickly as we wrap up here, I had to throw this in here just because I saw this AP story. So climate activists, whatever you want to call them, they are now evaluating pets for their carbon footprint, and they're basing it largely on what they eat, because food, there's a carbon footprint for food. So what pets are better, more carbon footprint friendly based on the food they eat. It's like, I mean, I am sure the Greta Thunbergs of the world have pets. Okay.
I saw what was just as funny this morning. An ice sheet broke off of Antarctica. And so we're now back to fearing global sea rise, right? It's like, I love people. Anytime you see that now, you'll see people put the Plymouth Rock thing up, where it was in 1609 or whatever. It's still the same place. It hasn't, man. So, I mean, it's like, it's one thing after another. And that is an example of a political movement that has, hit a sandbar. I mean, the facts don't back them up. No one cares anymore. And, the left still have some adherence to this, but they have no political power. And
look, you're right.
They never have it again.
Look, you're really grasping at straws when you start talking about the pets. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
America
you ain't gonna make friends on that
pet.
one. You can't have your dog because your dog is, people are going to say,
your dog's carbon footprint exceeds what is allowable. Get rid of your dog.
Yeah, the environment is just going to have to put up with my dog, baby.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, man. Oh, jeez.
I don't even have a dog.
Yeah, I know. I don't have any pets either, but this is crazy. All right. I'll try to wrap this up real quick. CNN's Abby Phillip was on the Breakfast Club podcast, as well as Pod Save America. But on the Breakfast Club, which is Charlemagne the God, she basically said she has to evaluate. She goes, look, we're not Fox News, but she also said we're not MSNBC, but we do lean center left. So she's put that out there for public consumption. She's out there, kind of humping a book here, her Jesse Jackson book, and all of that. But I'm glad that she said that. I mean, there is a distinction. To me, CNN has never been horrible. I mean, MSNBC was always just really bad.
I wouldn't say never.
Well, I mean, there have been periods, but they've never been as bad as
NBC.
MSNBC is just off the charts. Okay.
Yeah.
But on who's running the show,
and they've always made an attempt at, they had panels with people on it that didn't agree and so forth.
Yeah.
And I will say this, she runs that show and she definitely weighs in and helps the lefties argue with Scott Jennings and whatever. But she does make an attempt to let everybody get their view said.
Yeah, and right? she was saying that she wants, she says, I think we have a kind of an obligation to hear all voices, because apparently she's gotten a lot of blowback for, having MAGA people on or letting the MAGA voice out there. But that's good. See, that's not the kind of thing you're going to hear on MSNBC, which is going to become MS Now in 10 days.
I'll probably watch even more then.
Oh yeah. That's just that's really going to get me to do that. Sports wise, Dodgers win the World Series in seven games. Great World Series for everybody.
Great World Series, yeah.
Yeah, I had said that they might win in 6, but it got a little jittery when the Jays went up 3-2. But the Dodgers have a lot of money on that payroll, so they need to
get one thing I would say is, I said this in Myron E. Bell, cussed me out for it. Maybe he's right. But that was bad for baseball. They needed Toronto to win because they're about to go into CBA negotiations, right? And, what you have now is, in recent history, the rich teams are dominating and the mid-market teams can't keep up. And if Toronto would have won, he'd have had a giant talking point to push back with that. And now it's like the Dodgers won it 3 times in the last 5 years. It's just that's not a viable talking point anymore. So, baseball is going to have to think about the economic balance. You have a team like Milwaukee, that just was competitive in the playoffs. They got in the playoffs, but they weren't competitive. And, that's about as good as you can do in assembling a team in a mid-market, situation. So I don't think it helped them that the Dodgers won, but congratulations to the Dodgers. That's certainly not the kind of thing they need to be worried about. They just played good ball and the pitching was unreal. The Yamamoto, I was in Baltimore when he almost pitched the perfect game. And, he got to the 2 outs in the 9th and ended up, they were up 4-0. They ended up losing the game. So, it was one of those things, but that guy he's very, very good pitcher. And he's also really durable. And I guess, Lori told me like the one game when he lost, when they all went in the clubhouse and he came back out and cleaned the dugout. Is that the Asian players look at this completely differently. They leave everything spotless. They practice after the game. Like Marty plays these teams of Asian guys in his baseball. And, the game ends and we're packing up and going home. And those guys go out there and start taking infield. So,
yeah, the guy pitches in relief the night after he had started, right?
Yeah. That's a different way than we look at this. Way we look, I must preserve my arm.
Yeah.
But they don't. And the thing about the arm preserving too, it's like you hear about this because people get on the little league coaches like, this is my best pitcher. We're in the championship tournament, so yeah, he pitches a lot. You're throwing out your, Nolan Ryan threw every day. He threw every day. He didn't have no, bullpen days. He threw every day, whether he was pitching in the game or not. And, they got him out because he was like 65 or 70 to throw a first pitch for a game. He threw it 88 miles an hour he's our age, throwing 88 mile an hour fastball. So, it worked. It worked to actually use your arm.
And then finally, we'll close it out with the death of Dick Cheney, served as our vice president. I think there's a lot of mixed emotions from a lot of conservatives, how they looked at him, when he was a vice president, to how it was towards the end there, and his feelings about January 6th and a lot of other things, and his daughter and all of that. But he still, he still served this country in that regard, and I won't throw brickbats on him at his death here at this, but I know that there are a lot of mixed opinions, mixed emotions about Dick Cheney.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm where you are on that. But I will say this: if you like J.D. Vance, there's some degree of gratitude goes to Dick Cheney because he's the one who made it possible for vice presidents to be an important part of policy making. Right? It really wasn't true.
Yeah.
And one of the things that kind of hurt Harris when she was running against Trump last year is that, she had been a vice president, but not lived up to that standard. She just sort of floated along for 4 years. And, so like he did raise the standard of what it takes to be a vice president.
Biden tried to give her policy and she flopped.
She said, whoa, it looks like work, buddy.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the election analysis in particular. As always, please stay safe and stay well. Please remember, we live in the greatest country in the world. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. And as always, God bless America, and we will see you again next week.